When you think of Philadelphia, what comes to your mind? Is it the beautiful skyline of the Delaware Valley or the historical college hall on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania? Well, let me show you a clip and see if that matches your mental image of Philly.
Alarm bells are sounding in Philadelphia about Trank.
You'd see people kind of like walking around looking like animals when their knuckles are touching the ground.
What a nightmare. So what's going on? Let's find out more in today's Facts Tell. I'm Sina. To understand the situation, you need to know of a particular drug, xylazine, a powerful animal sedative. The name might sound unfamiliar to you, but you probably know it by its popular nickname, Trank, or zombie drug, which has flooded the streets of Philadelphia. The disturbing sights I showed you at the beginning were taken at Philly's Kensington Avenue, where zombie-like addicts were crowding filthy sidewalks and even shooting up in broad daylight. And maybe you're now asking, what does Trank have to do with all this? Well, this deadly sedative was added to street drugs like heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl to create a euphoric effect. And according to public reports, more than 90% of Philadelphia's lab-tested dope samples were positive for Trank. This video could be disturbing to watch.
We've started to see Trank come into the dope. People are getting extreme injuries and wounds. You can see down to the muscle tissue and the bone, large abscesses and infections where they're injecting.
In a joint statement released, the Philadelphia Department of Health and Board of Health said that xylazine has hit Philadelphia particularly hard, causing increased overdose deaths as well as severe wounds that can lead to sepsis and amputation. This explains the phenomenon we've seen in the Kensington neighborhood, where people were acting disoriented and sluggish. But Trank is not just a Philly problem. It has also appeared in other drug hot zones across America. According to a study published by Oxford University Press in the Journal of Analytical Toxicology, xylazine has been detected in the drug supply in 36 states and the District of Columbia. Even babies are in danger of ingesting mixtures of fentanyl and xylazine, and experts are warning about pediatric poisonings.
The latest data available from the DEA shows there's been a more than 1,000% increase in xylazine-positive overdose deaths in the South region of the U.S. and a 750% increase here in the West region. Triple-digit increases also reported in the Midwest and the Northeast.
Since the drug concoction with xylazine has caused so many deaths across the country, the Biden administration officially designated the animal tranquilizer as an emerging threat in April this year. But I guess more actions is in need because Trank is just a part of the larger overdose crisis plaguing the U.S. According to the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 107,000 people died from overdoses last year, and 66% of those deaths involved synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Before 2020, the number of overdose deaths had never passed 100,000. In other words, the overdose crisis in the U.S. is so severe, and it just became worse because of the Trank epidemic. Here's something I want to specifically talk about. How did all this happen in the first place? One of the key reasons for America's overdose problem can be traced back to the opioid overprescription crisis, which has killed at least 450,000 people since 1999. The notorious pharmaceutical company Purdue Pharma has pleaded guilty to the federal criminal charges twice, in 2007 and 2020, for deceptive marketing that downplayed the risk of becoming addicted to OxyContin, a painkiller it produced. It marketed the opioids to more than 100 doctors that is suspected of writing illegal prescriptions and lying about this to the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. Purdue also pleaded guilty to paying illegal kickbacks to doctors and to an electronic health records company in order to embed pop-up alerts to physicians and therefore boost opioid prescriptions. Back in 2007, the company paid $600 million in fines for misleading doctors, patients, and government about its addictive drug. This year, the Sackler family, who owns Purdue Pharma, agreed to pay $6 billion for a settlement in exchange for green lights coming from 9 state attorneys general to drop their objection to a deal granting immunity from opioid lawsuits to the Sacklers. So basically, they just paid their way out. Because remember, the court filings show the family took in $10 billion in profits from OxyContin. Yet they still walk away, even though their company was part of creating a huge public health crisis in America. And the opioid crisis is far from over. If anything, it's gotten worse. The entire overprescription crisis has turned into a national drug nightmare plaguing the U.S.
We've all heard about the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, overprescribing opioids like OxyContin, and that set the table for millions of new opioid users. When their prescriptions ran out, they found themselves addicted to opioids. And so they filled this craving the only way they could, which was by buying heroin on the street. And eventually, there was basically not enough heroin to meet this demand. And so fentanyl basically rushed in to fill this void. And before long, there was a point where you couldn't find any heroin that wasn't cut with fentanyl.
The core of this problem is that the demand for drugs is so big, and without effective actions done on the demand side, works around the supply side can't really help. For example, when fighting crystal meth, the U.S. government tried different ways to control the supply, regulating the sale of different chemicals and forcing meth producers out of business. But then, thousands of small-scale operations came along, just like what we've seen in Breaking Bad. Mexican drug cartels also stepped in later to take over the large U.S. drug market. So here's the ending result.
You can't win this war on the supply side. Not only are drugs widely available, demand unbroken, and some drugs purer than in the past, with a budget of around $30 billion, the US Drug Enforcement Agency has an efficiency rate of less than 1% when it comes to stopping the flow of drugs into the US and inside the US.
That's why you see the war on drugs turning out to be a complete failure after 40 years, and more than $1 trillion has been squandered on the impossible. The mission to make America drug-free. And now, the U.S. is not even close to being drug-free. In fact, it's leading in terms of illicit drug consumption more than any other country in the world. Marijuana is the most commonly used federally illegal drug in the U.S., and over 48 million people consumed it in 2019. And guess what? Instead of regulating the demand side, the recreational use of cannabis has been legalized in over 20 states in the U.S. Lawmakers in some other states, like Ohio and Oklahoma, are still working to decriminalize its use. In other words, more states will possibly legalize this drug in 2023. Support for marijuana legalization has become mainstream among Democratic politicians, and some Republicans are also backing the idea. People advocating it see cannabis as a moneymaker, even though it poses a public health and safety risk. So what can I say? They're not taming demand, but creating more. But there is always a panacea for U.S. politicians. Blaming China. If there's a problem that can be solved, then better find a scapegoat. In a DEA report warning people about tranq this year, there's a sentences saying the two Mexican cartels are using chemicals largely sourced from China to produce fentanyl that is trafficked around the U.S. And I bet you have seen headlines like, China is responsible for the fentanyl crisis in the U.S. This is not true, as China has taken the lead in the world in officially regulating the entire class of fentanyl substances back in 2019, playing an important role in preventing illegal manufacturing, trafficking, and abuse of fentanyl. It's the cartels who are actually making this drug. And of course, the U.S. also blames Mexico, saying it's responsible for America's fentanyl crisis and will introduce laws to authorize the use of military force against its southern neighbor in order to stem the flow of fentanyl into the country. But after 40 years, the U.S. still treats the drug crisis as a supply-side problem. I mean, if there's no demand, who are the cartels going to sell to? Stop legalizing weed. I bet if marijuana becomes a major public health issue one day, US politicians will start blaming countries that grow cannabis. So finding someone to blame won't help better the gruesome scenes in the Kensington neighborhood, and politicizing this whole issue would just waste more time and resources. America's national policies on drug control need to reflect more on the demand side and the important role the government is supposed to play. Otherwise, allowing drug abuse and creating chances for potential overdoses just reflects the failure of social governance. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you like our show, please remember to click like and subscribe. I'm Saina. Bye for now.